The Sicilian Mafia isn't just a criminal organization. It's a shadowy empire that has controlled entire regions, infiltrated governments, and shaped history in unimaginable ways. But beneath the facade of secrecy lies a chilling reality, a history soaked in blood, betrayal, and corruption that stretches across centuries. From their origin as vigilantes, protecting rural communities, to becoming the architects of a global network of crime. The Mafia's evolution is a story of power, fear, and resilience. Yet for all their notoriety, the real story of their rise and the devastating cost of their influence is rarely told in full. In this video, we'll peel back the layers of mystery surrounding the Sicilian Mafia, uncovering their dark origins and discussing their rise to infamy. Buckle up. It was a cold, silent night in January 1837, when the flickering glow of a burning farmhouse suddenly lit up in a small town in Sicily, a rugged island off the southern tip of Italy. The screams of a landowner and his family echoed across the hills as they watched their life's work consumed by flames. But the culprits of this horrible act weren't faceless bandits. They were the guardiani, or local enforcers, whom the landowner himself had hired and were sworn to protect him in exchange for payment. So this wasn't a petty crime. It was a message. The landowner had refused to pay an additional fee demanded by the guardiani, and they wanted to make sure nobody in Corleone repeats the same mistake. So how did the guardiani become so powerful? You see, Sicily in the 19th century was a land of contrasts. Its breathtaking coast and golden fields masked an unforgiving reality. And that's because the Kingdom of Italy, which technically ruled Sicily, treated it as a distant afterthought, leaving the island to fester in corruption and lawlessness. Thieves roamed the countryside without fear, and since justice was luxury that even the rich couldn't afford, wealthy landowners turned to the guardiani oracle strongmen, who promised to keep criminals at bay for a price. At first, it seemed like a reasonable situation, but things got bad when guardiani soon realized their power. They weren't just protecting land, they were controlling it. And so what initially began as a small fee soon turned into full-scale extortion. In fact, anyone who refused to pay risked losing everything: their crops, their homes, and even their lives. By the late 1800s, this system had transformed into something very sinister. The guardiani had become the Mafia, a secretive organization that didn't just enforce laws, but wrote their own. Whilst infiltrating every aspect of Sicilian life, landowners handed over their wealth, politicians traded loyalty for power, and local police became pawns in their own game. The Mafia didn't just take control, they owned the entire island. And those who dared to resist found their homes destroyed, their businesses ruined, or their families mourning an untimely death. The Mafia thrived on fear, and that fear became their most valuable weapon. By the end of the 19th century, their ambitions outgrew the island. Smuggling operations stretched across the Mediterranean, trafficking goods, weapons, and even people. What began as local muscle now evolved into an empire built on secrecy, violence, and the ruthless pursuit of power. But behind this rise to power is the story of a people abandoned by their rulers, and left to fend for themselves in a world where survival came at a cost. Sicily's cries for justice fell on deaf ears, and the Mafia filled the void, becoming the rulers the island never had. And as the Mafia tightened its grip on Sicily, its leaders began to dream bigger. The island was just the start, and their next goal was to extend their shadow across the globe. And yet it wasn't just the common man who lived in fear. Even those with power, judges, politicians, journalists, were not immune. Anyone who dare expose the Mafia's grip on Sicily were often found in shallow graves, their deaths wrapped in secrecy and suspicion. In 1982, the shockwaves reverberated across Italy when General Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa was assassinated. A police officer sent to take down the Mafia. Dalla Chiesa was gunned down in broad daylight, his death a reminder that no one, not even the highest authorities, was safe from the Mafia's wrath. As the decades wore on, the Mafia's ambitions stretched far beyond the island's rugged hills. The once local thugs had evolved into global predators. By the 1970s and 80s, their hands were deep in the heroin trade. Vast quantities of heroin flowed from the opium fields of Asia into the veins of Europe, all under the watchful eyes of the Mafia. But it wasn't just drugs that filled their coffers. Guns, stolen art, illicit goods of all kinds became part of their lucrative empire. Their operations sprawled across continents, creating a network of crime that knew no borders. No longer merely a Sicilian institution, they had become a global force. With this new reach came new allies: Colombian cartels, Russian mobs, and countless other international syndicates. Together they wove a vast sprawling web of crime, one that spanned continents, transcending borders and laws. Sicily, once the beating heart of the Mafia, was now just one node in an ever-expanding empire. Salvatore Totorina and Bernardo Provenzano, the leaders of the Mafia's most brutal factions, understood the power of this new world order. They saw opportunities in the cracks of the global system, loopholes and gaps that could be exploited for unimaginable profits. Money laundering schemes, high-end real estate investments, and illicit gambling operations became their tools to infiltrate international markets. What started as a local racket had blossomed into a multi-billion-dollar empire. The once tranquil streets of Sicily were now the nerve center of a global criminal juggernaut, with tentacles reaching into every corner of the underworld. For decades, the Mafia's grip on Sicily seemed unbreakable. Their rule was marked by ruthless certainty. Their influence stretched across every corner of the island. But even the most powerful empires make one critical mistake. They underestimate the forces of those who rise to challenge them. In the 1980s and early 1990s, two men emerged from the shadows, willing to face the impossible: Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino. These judges, whose names would become synonymous with justice, were determined to expose the dark heart of the Mafia. Giovanni Falcone was a quiet storm, a man of meticulous resolve. He spent years sifting through mountains of evidence, piecing together the secretive puzzle of the Mafia's empire. Every discovery he made was a victory, a small crack in the unyielding wall of silence that surrounded Sicily's criminal underworld. His dedication led to the historic Maxi trial of 1992, where hundreds of Mafia members were convicted in one sweeping blow. For a brief moment, the Mafia's power trembled. The walls they had built over generations began to show signs of collapse. But the Mafia did not take defeat lightly. Their retaliation was swift and devastating. On a quiet stretch of highway in May 1992, a bomb exploded in a flash of death. Giovanni Falcone, his wife, and 3 of his bodyguards were consumed by the blast. In a moment, a life's work, a symbol of defiance, was reduced to ashes. The message was unmistakable. No one, not even the brave souls who dared to confront them, was safe. Yet the Mafia's victory was hollow. Less than 2 months later, a similar fate befell Paolo Borsellino, Falcone's closest friend and ally. On July 19, 1992, Borsellino's car was engulfed in another explosion. The heart of Sicily seemed to stop. The island, which had lived for so long under the Mafia's shadow, reeled from the loss. The death of these 2 courageous men were not just personal tragedies. They were a direct assault on the soul of Italy itself. The Mafia had underestimated one thing: the spirit of resistance they had sparked. Instead of silencing the fight, they brutally fueled the fire that could not be extinguished. Across the nation, law enforcement and citizens, once paralyzed by fear, rose in defiance. Anti-Mafia groups flourished, and for the first time, the Mafia's own began to turn on their masters. The crisp winter air hung heavy over Palermo as the doors of the courthouse slammed shut behind Totorina. The man known as the Beast had ruled with an iron fist, his cold eyes betraying no remorse as he surveyed the city he had terrorized for decades. For 20 long years, the Mafia had shielded its leader, allowing him to remain a ghost in plain sight. Yet behind those eyes, Rina had orchestrated murders and bombings that left the island trembling in fear. But in 1993, the walls finally closed in. Rina's arrest reverberated like a thunderclap across the underworld. The Mafia's fortress, which had stood unshaken for so long, began to crack. Names once whispered in awe: Bernardo Provenzano, Matteo Messina Denaro, now haunted the criminals who had once served them. These once untouchable men were now hunted, their empires crumbling as the law's grip tightened. But the beast's arrest only sparked a brutal storm. The Mafia's retaliation was swift, its violence as fierce as ever. Bombs erupted in the streets, a chilling reminder that even in chains, Rena could still tear apart the heart of Sicily. Yet amid the chaos, something unexpected began to stir in the shadows. The Mafia's greatest weapon, the silence, began to crack. Men who had once sworn unflinching allegiance to Cosa Nostra's code. These men emerged from the darkness, their confessions cutting through years of bloodshed and silence. With every word, the once indomitable myth of the Mafia began to shatter, and the battle that had seemed unwinnable suddenly shifted in favor of justice. As these men began to speak, the grip of the Mafia loosened. The untouchable rulers of Sicily, who had commanded the island through terror, now found themselves exposed, their secrets spilling into the light, and the very fabric of the organization, built on violence and secrecy, started to unravel. Though the bloodstains of the past began to fade, the scars they left on Sicily's soul ran deep. The island, forever marked by the weight of its history, couldn't escape its past. The ghost of that dark era lingered, sometimes invisible, but always present. With secrets hidden in every corner, the Mafia's story continued to hold its grip even decades later. How far can the Mafia's reach go into governments, law enforcement, and even churches? Could anyone be truly safe from their control, even if they tried to run away? Let us know down in the comment section below. We hope you enjoyed this video. Remember to like and share it and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in another one soon.